Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, aviation is resilient and we are rebounding. And people who longed for the freedom to fly are taking to the skies again and in growing numbers. By next year, most markets should see traffic reach or indeed exceed pre-pandemic levels. Air cargo stood out as a lifeline for vaccines, supply chains, and airline revenues throughout the COVID-19 crisis. And it has grown to be an even more vital contributor to revenues. Now, COVID-19 was catastrophic. It robbed our world of millions of people, family, friends, and colleagues. And the response of governments dismantled connectivity, destroyed jobs, and inflicted misery on people. Actions justified by politicians around the world that their decisions was driven by the science. George Bernard Shaw once observed that science has never solved a problem without creating 10 more, and how true that is. But we survived, defying predictions of bankruptcies and failures. Now, it certainly helps that prior to the crisis, the industry's financial foundations were at their strongest point ever, owing to your leadership. It was a team effort that saw us through. Airlines took prudent and difficult decisions to stay afloat as revenues evaporated. For our people, it was a story of wage cuts, layoffs, reassignments, or retrenchments. But let's not forget that these actions saved hundreds of thousands of jobs. Our shareholders and financiers provided much-needed loans and investment, and indeed some governments had the foresight to financially bridge many airlines through the crisis. Our industry is now leaner, tougher, and nimbler. Our latest analysis shows that losses in 2021 were close to $42 billion US. Now, that's a huge loss, but down from our earlier estimate of $52 billion US. And we now believe that the global losses will be cut further this year to $9.7 billion US. Industry-wide profitability is on the horizon for 2023. So yes, we are resilient, and yes, we are rebounding. But while the outlook is positive, the business environment is challenging. Inflation topped 9% in the OECD in April. Our outlook expects GDP to grow at 3.4% this year. Now, that's not bad, but it's significantly down on earlier forecasts. The World Bank expects energy prices to soar 50% compared to 2021. And Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine has destabilized globalization, threatened world food supply, and recreated a political divide not seen since the Cold War. And of course, fixing battered balance sheets carrying debts of over $650 billion US will be a monumental challenge. So there's no way to sugarcoat the bitter economic and political realities we face. But the desire to travel and the necessity of moving goods are both solid. And recent history supports optimism for aviation in challenging times. During the global financial crisis, travel patterns changed, but passenger numbers held steady with a quick return to growth from 2010. And in the decade that followed, it delivered aviation's strongest financial performance ever. History repeats itself, and we already see strong demand that will grow in the months and years ahead. Now, to support our future success, I will highlight just 4 of the challenges for our collective attention. We, and I mean everyone, must learn the lessons from COVID-19. We need to be clear with governments on what is needed from regulation. We must deliver on our net zero emissions target and commitment by 2050. And to be honest, it has never been more important for us to improve gender diversity. Now, COVID-19 will not be the last global pandemic. Clearly, we all hope for a very long gap before the next one, but it is vital that we learn from the mistakes made in how aviation was shut down and how it is being reopened. When COVID-19 hit, governments closed borders and stopped people from flying. They did not consult with the industry. They did not follow the advice of the WHO. And yes, decisions were based on science, but it was political science, not medical or data science. COVID-19 still spread around the world. An analysis by Oxera and Edge Health has concluded that at best, border closures may have delayed infection peaks by just a few days. There was one virus, but each government invented its own methodology to control what travel remains possible. And this was documented by Thematic. At the peak of the crisis, it was registering hundreds of changes daily to entry restrictions. Now, how can anybody have confidence in such a shambolic, uncoordinated, and knee-jerk response by governments? The cost of government mismanagement was substantial. It devastated economies, disrupted supply chains, and destroyed jobs. The restrictions even hurt people's health. Our research shows that 2/3 of people felt their quality of life deteriorated because of the impact of travel restrictions. And this is confirmed by the WHO data, which shows a 25% rise in mental health issues. So the first lesson is the wisdom of what the WHO said from the very beginning. Closing borders is not the right response to a pandemic. Now, as government eased COVID restrictions, different problems emerge: delays and disruptions. Disruptions happen even at the best of times, but many of these could have been avoided. Many governments had no plan and did not work with aviation. They worked in isolation. They made things up day by day, and in some cases did complete U-turns, the worst being the panicked overreaction to Omicron. Now, this unpredictability made the restart much more difficult than it needed to be. And it's no wonder there are operational challenges for some airlines and at some airports today. The immediate priority is working together with governments and airports to address capacity issues where they have occurred. And let's be clear, these problems don't exist everywhere, and the solutions are already emerging. The longer-term priority is ensuring that governments work much more closely with airlines in the next crisis, whenever and whatever that may be. Now let's move to regulation. It's not the most glamorous topic, but there are good reasons for all of us to be concerned about recent developments. As the regulatory focus shifts from non-pandemic issues, or to non-pandemic issues, politicians are filling agendas with a plethora of initiatives. Not all of these will be helpful. 3 areas are of particular concern: slots, accessibility, and consumer rights. Now, on slots, we all saw how valuable flexibility in the global system was during the crisis. It preserved networks when government decisions made demand disappear. We still need that flexibility because the world is still far from normal. But even more critically, we cannot let governments forget the importance of a global standard approach for slots. The reminder is timely because the UK and the EU both plan to review slot rules this year. Now, is there anybody in this room who believes that they will reach the same conclusion? Different outcomes will put the predictability of the global system at risk. Brazil actually offers a good example. It strengthened its regulation by working within the framework of the World Airport Slot Guidelines. It's the way all governments need to work. On accessibility, countries are aligning policies, including on transport, with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Brazil, Canada, Colombia, Egypt, the EU, the UK, the US are particularly active. Now, yes, we need to improve, but travellers with disabilities would see no benefit if the 185 signatories created 185 different solutions. And on consumer rights, at least 30 countries are looking at their regulations. And much of this activity is spurred by the extraordinary experiences when governments shut down connectivity at the beginning of the pandemic. In other words, they now want to regulate us for the chaos they created. And keep in mind, EU Regulation 261 on consumer rights already costs the industry about $10 billion annually. And much of this is from disruptions forced upon us by other providers, such as air traffic control. So the stakes are high. And we don't oppose regulation, but it must create solutions and not add to the problems. And unfortunately, this is rarely the case. When it comes to politicians and regulation, let me paraphrase another great Irish writer, Brendan Behan, who said, "I've never seen a situation so dismal that a politician couldn't make worse." And now I turn to the glamorous part of regulation, infrastructure charges. At our AGM in October last year, I reported on the egregious attempts by infrastructure providers to raise charges, and that nightmare is becoming a reality. My good friends Heathrow were allowed to increase their charges by 50% and is asking for more. Schiphol confirmed a 37% hike for 2022 to 2024, and not to be outdone, Dublin joined the group wanting a massive 80% hike for 2023 to 26. But the prize for the cheekiest behaviour goes to the government of the Bahamas. In 2021, Bahamas regained control of its airspace from the US and then contracted the US FAA to continue providing overflight services free of charge. The government of Bahamas then promptly started collecting overflight fees from airlines at double the previous rate. Now, you could not make this stuff up. These are just the vanguard. Focusing on airports, out of the top 100, more than half announced increases for 2022 and 2023, expecting their customers to make up for the revenues they did not get during the pandemic. Try that for a competitive business. Dear valued customer, we are charging you double for your coffee today because you couldn't buy one yesterday. Who would accept that? This behavior is why we oppose light touch regulation proposals by airports. And we categorically reject their characterization of aeronautical revenues as being insignificant. In fact, Airport Council International reports that aeronautical revenues for airports were $99 billion in 2019. Too many airports are addicted to the spend big and cream it off the customer mentality. And airport opposition to strong, independent economic regulation demonstrates that they know it's wrong. A rare regulatory success story is Spain. The government there rejected IATA's unjustified request to recover $2.4 billion of pandemic losses. We need to see other governments and regulators show similar backbone. Now I turn to sustainability. At our last AGM, we took the monumental decision to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Now we must turn our commitment into carbon reductions. Predicting what technologies will be available in 2015 is an imprecise science, but we currently expect 100% carbon abatement, with 65% of that through SAF, 19% through offsets, and eventually through carbon capture, 13% from hydrogen and electric propulsion that Airbus, Boeing, and other manufacturers are committed to delivering by 2035. And 3% should come from more efficient operations. And talking about operational efficiencies, governments also need to do their part. The EU spearheaded the charge on sustainability, but the near complete failure of its member states to implement the Single European Sky exposes government greenwashing. The Single European Sky could eliminate up to 10% of Europe's air transport emissions with technology that exists today. Now, it's beyond embarrassing. It is a scandal for Europe that it has failed to deliver. And the insult is being added to injury, with European environmental taxes reaching $5 billion annually. These taxes have not delivered the Single European Sky, not produced a single drop of sustainable aviation fuel, or reduced emissions in any way. Taxes won't stop flights. They just price flying out of the reach of some people and make our industry less efficient. In contrast, airlines, you in this room, have already committed $17 billion to forward purchase of SAF. And irrespective of the price, airlines have used every single drop of sustainable aviation fuel that was available to us in 2021. And it will be the same for this year. We'd buy more if we could. Now, fortunately, airline demand has stimulated an exponential increase in SAF production. By 2025, there could be 5 billion litres of SAF produced annually, 40 times what was available last year. So the momentum is undeniable, but there is still work to be done. And government policy will play a big role. Governments don't need to micromanage how airlines purchase SAF. They need to incentivize production. The successful use of production incentives to transition to solar or wind for electricity production proves the point. The cost of clean solutions dropped below the cost of using fossil fuels. Clean electricity is now cheap and widely available. And with a similar approach, we could see 30 billion litres of SAF by 2030. Now, that's still far from where we need to be, but it would be a clear tipping point towards our net zero ambition and ample SAF quantities at affordable prices. Offsets are a smaller part of our ambition and bring their own unique challenges. Longer term, as we move from stabilizing emissions to our net zero focus, our offset providers must transition to a viable market that includes affordable and scalable nature-based solutions and carbon removals. The immediate use of offsets is with CORSIA, the landmark international agreement reached through ICAO to stabilize aviation's international emissions from 2020. CORSIA, unfortunately, is in danger. Governments are split on the baseline. It was meant to be the average of international emissions for 2019 and 2020. Now, when CORSIA was agreed in 2016, nobody could have imagined that governments would stop airlines from flying for much of 2020. After agreeing to remedy this by using only 2019, which is the industry's position as the baseline, several governments now want to penalize us for not flying and have proposed to revert to the 2019-2020 average, irrespective of the inequities. And on top of this, not all governments respect CORSIA as the single economic for international aviation that it was meant to be. The most worrying is the EU. Its parliament voted to apply its ETS on top of CORSIA, forgetting that the world unanimously rejected this extraterritorial ambition in 2012. So where do we go from here? First, we need a successful, fair, and effective CORSIA. Our proposal is to maintain the 2019 baseline. If states want to be more ambitious, and let's be fair, I think they should be, incentivizing SAF is the right way to go. Second, to enable a comprehensive approach to sustainability, governments must commit to the big picture. Our net zero by 2050 goal is firm, and we will be accountable. Governments have no similar commitment. To enable net zero by 2050 with an effective policy framework, it is essential that this year's ICAO Assembly commit to a long-term aspirational goal of similar ambition to this industry. This approach is in the DNA of aviation. It's how we tackled noise and improved safety. Achieving net zero by 2050 is critical. Failure to agree a long-term aspirational goal or a polite agreement that kicks the can down the road would be unacceptable outcomes. Finally, the last area I will address is gender diversity. Now, a photograph of this room would demonstrate the challenge. Half of the world's population is female, but you would never know that from this male-dominated room. Addressing gender imbalance is the right thing to do. The gender imbalance is shortchanging our industry on talent, and it is not sustainable. How can we solve the skill shortages that we are all facing without equally engaging both halves of the population? In 2019, we launched the 25 by 2025 initiative to improve the industry's gender balance. Since then, 111 organizations have signed up to its commitments. Signatories commit to reach at least 25% female participation in senior or non-traditional positions, or improve female representation in these roles by 25%. And we should be inspired that change is happening in our industry. In 2019, 3% of IATA airline CEOs were women. Today, that is nearing 9%. Recent female CEO appointments at Pegasus, El Al, KLM, Austrian, and others are part of this momentum. And indicative sampling reporting by the 2025 signatories shows that nearly a quarter of senior roles are held by women. But more progress, of course, is needed. Now, if you have committed to 25 by 2025, thank you very much for your leadership. Those of you who have not yet committed are encouraged to join. There is a booth in the exhibition hall where the IATA team can help you to join and drive for change. Look, this is a unique time for aviation. We have proven our resilience, and we are rebounding as a safe, sustainable, and diverse industry that is on its way back to being profitable. The recovery from COVID-19, however, is coincident with a tectonic shift in geopolitics. The Russian invasion and subsequent war in Ukraine have shaken the foundations of globalization to which aviation has contributed so much, and that in turn enables so much of our business. No war is good. Wars bring human suffering, and the stakes in Ukraine could not be of greater consequence. That is why, even for an apolitical, business-focused association, there can be no ambiguity in condemning what is happening in Ukraine. I am sure I speak for everyone participating in this assembly in calling for peace. In the meantime, we continue our critical work of bringing people together. We are the builders of peace and the enablers of freedom. Thank you very much.